Lonely CEO millionaire leaves his safe open to test his maid. What she did next. Did someone leave the safe open? Claire whispered, the words barely audible as she froze in the doorway of the study. The Ashworth mansion was quiet that morning, still wrapped in the hush of dawn. Pale sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows on the gleaming marble floor. A grand chandelier hung above, glittering faintly, and the rhythmic ticking of a century-old grandfather clock echoed through the silence. Everything was still, except for the open vault. The safe sat across the room, its steel door gaping wide. Inside, bundles of $100 bills were stacked neatly beside velvet cases of diamonds, gold bracelets, and sealed legal documents. It looked deliberate, exposed like a stage set for temptation. Hidden just beyond the hallway, in the shadowed archway, stood Alexander Ashworth. Stood Tom Ashworth. At 33, he was already a legend, ruthless in business, isolated in life. His name synonymous with control. Wealth, power, structure. He trusted only these. Love had betrayed him, friends had used him, and those who swore loyalty had stolen behind his back. The only thing Alexander truly relied on now was observation, and what he observed this morning would tell him everything. She was right on time. Claire Williams, 27, entered the study precisely at 8:42 a.m. She was slender, her blonde hair tied in a low bun, wearing a simple gray uniform with white trim. She walked with practiced precision, always respectful, always silent. She had been working for him just over 2 months. In that time, she had never asked for anything, never overstepped, and never once looked him in the eye longer than was appropriate. But something about her lingered in his mind, something about her quiet sorrow and how she seemed to carry an invisible weight, always with dignity. He had to know. Was it real? Claire stepped into the room, cloth in hand, but stopped cold when she noticed the open safe. Her breath caught, her eyes darted toward the hallway. No one. Alexander's pulse quickened. She moved slowly, cautiously. Her eyes lingered on the contents, but not with greed, with confusion. Her hand tightened slightly around the dusting cloth. Then, without a word, she walked toward the vault, not to touch the money, but to gently wipe the edge of the door. She cleaned with slow, reverent strokes, never disturbing the contents, never glancing over her shoulder. Alexander leaned closer, watching every motion. Then, something happened he did not expect. Claire reached into the pocket of her apron and pulled out a small folded photograph. She stared at it for a moment. Her expression softened, pain flickered across her face, then disappeared behind the calm again. She looked around once more to make sure she was alone, then quietly placed the photo on the edge of the safe, just beside the stacks of cash. She whispered something. Alexander strained to hear but could not make out the words. Her voice was barely more than breath. Then, gently, she lifted the photo again, pressed her lips to it, and returned it to her pocket. She closed the vault door. No hesitation, no second glance. The moment passed. Claire moved on, dusting the bookshelf, the desk, the armchair beside the fireplace. As if the open safe had never existed. Alexander remained still in the shadows, stunned. He had expected fear, or perhaps temptation, at the very least a flicker of interest, but what he saw instead was something far more disarming. Restraint. Grace. A sacred kind of dignity that no amount of wealth could touch. For a long time, after she left, he stood staring at the now closed safe. Then he walked to the center of the room and opened it himself. The money was untouched. The jewelry lay as he had left it, but he kept thinking about the photo, about the whisper, about the way she had treated the contents of the vault not as temptation, but as something unworthy of her concern. It was no longer about the test. It was about her. Alexander sat down in the leather chair behind the desk, his reflection faintly visible in the polished surface. He loosened his tie and stared at his hands. For years they had built empires, signed contracts, ended partnerships. But this morning he had seen something that shook him deeper than any business betrayal ever had. He had seen someone choose honor over desperation. And it changed everything. Alexander sat alone in his private study, the glow of his monitor casting pale shadows across his chiseled features. The house was quiet again, the kind of silence he had grown used to, one that echoed more than it comforted. But tonight, the stillness was different. It pulsed with curiosity, with a strange ache he could not shake. He clicked the mouse and pulled up the security footage from that morning. No one else had access to these files. No one else even knew the hidden camera existed inside the carved molding above the study's bookshelf. It had been installed years ago, another layer of control, of certainty, of proof against betrayal. The video began to play. Claire entered the frame, as precise as ever, her posture straight, her motions efficient. And then she saw the safe. He leaned forward. She paused, looked around. Her expression unreadable, but her eyes, those soft, sad eyes, told a deeper story. Alexander had watched it live, but now, slowed down, he noticed more. He paused the video at the moment she placed the photo beside the stacks of money. He zoomed in. The image was blurry, pixelated, but clear enough to make out 3 figures. Claire, younger but still recognizably her, kneeling beside 2 girls, twins, maybe 6 or 7, who were smiling with wide, carefree grins. Behind them, propped up by pillows, was an older woman with a scarf covering her head. The woman's smile was tired, fragile. Alexander stared. He reached for his phone and made a call to his most discreet investigator. He gave a name, Claire Williams. "No public exposure," he said. "Just tell me who she is." The report came back in less than 2 days. Claire Elizabeth Williams, former elementary school teacher, widowed at 25, her husband Daniel had died in a construction accident, leaving her with twin daughters, Lily and Grace. Her mother, Eleanor, was diagnosed with stage 4 lymphoma shortly after. Claire had left teaching and taken any job she could find, cleaning houses, waitressing, overnight shifts at grocery stores, to make ends meet. No criminal record, no lawsuits, no debts, just survival. Alexander read the report 3 times. Each word sat heavier than the last. He thought about how she moved through his house, silent, invisible, and yet meticulous. She never lingered in rooms she did not belong in. She never interrupted. She never looked at him longer than necessary. But now, knowing what she carried, every glance of hers felt heavier, every quiet moment sacred. He remembered passing by the kitchen one morning and seeing Claire threading a needle with careful fingers. He had paused, curious. She had been repairing a torn sleeve on the cook's jacket. He remembered the day one of his expensive watches had fallen into the garden path. It had rained that night. The next morning the watch had appeared, clean, intact, placed neatly on his dresser. No note, no credit claimed. She had never mentioned it, and now he knew why. She was surviving, but not begging. She was drowning, yet somehow still graceful, still dignified. That night, Alexander stood by his office window, the city lights stretching out endlessly beyond the glass. He stared into the horizon, his mind no longer on board meetings or quarterly earnings. He was thinking about a woman who never asked for help, and a photo placed beside millions, like it mattered more than anything else in the world. He did not pity her. He admired her. And for the first time in years, Alexander Ashworth felt something stirring, something that both scared and compelled him, a need to understand, a need to step closer. The rain whispered steadily against the tall, arched windows of the Ashworth estate. It was the kind of cold, gray afternoon that seemed to slow time itself. Thunder rumbled faintly in the distance, and the scent of wet earth and distant lavender from the garden filled the air. Alexander sat alone in the grand library, the fire crackling low in the hearth. He had made his decision that morning, but found himself hesitating now, swirling the untouched scotch in his glass, his jaw clenched. Then came the soft knock. He did not answer immediately. When he did, his voice was low. "Come in." Claire stepped inside, her hair slightly damp from the rain, her uniform neat as always. She looked at him with quiet expectation, not fear, not deference, just readiness. "I asked you here," Alexander began, standing slowly, "because there's something I need to say." Claire said nothing. He walked to the window, watching the rain slide down the glass like slow-moving tears. That morning in the study, the safe, it was not an accident. Claire's expression did not change, but her hands folded tighter in front of her. "I left it open on purpose, to see what you would do." The room filled with the sound of the rain and the ticking of the antique clock on the mantel. Claire looked down, eyes fixed on the rug. "I needed to know if I could trust you," he said. "I've been betrayed before, repeatedly, by people who smiled at me every day." Claire remained silent, and when she finally spoke, her voice was steady. "I didn't know being decent was something I had to pass a test for." Alexander flinched as if the words physically struck him. She met his gaze now, unwavering. "You don't know me, but I'm not your past." He took a deep breath and slowly sat down, setting the glass on the table beside him. "My ex-wife left me after 5 years, took a small fortune and half my sanity. My most trusted assistant siphoned company funds for over a year. I did not see it coming. I trusted them both." His voice cracked, just a little. "After that, I stopped believing trust was anything but a liability." Claire's features softened, not pity, but understanding. "I didn't mean to punish you for what others did. I just did not know how else to protect myself," he said quietly. There was a silence neither of them rushed to fill. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the trees like a whispered confession. Then Claire stepped forward, not too close, but close enough. "I never asked for your trust," she said. "I just did my job. And I'd do it the same way whether someone was watching or not." Alexander looked at her. Really looked. Her face was pale but calm, her blonde hair clinging slightly to her cheek from the rain. Her eyes held stories, pain, resilience, and something else. Grace. He gave a faint nod. "That's what scared me, I think. That kind of integrity. It's rare, almost threatening." Claire tilted her head slightly, not quite smiling. "Maybe instead of testing people, you should try believing in them." She turned to leave, but paused at the door. "And maybe, Mr. Ashworth, stop being so afraid of being human." That night, when Alexander returned home from a brief meeting, his coat dripping rain onto the marble floor, he found something that made him pause. On the kitchen island was a folded towel. Next to it, a steaming mug of ginger tea. A small sticky note, written in a neat, simple hand. "Drink while warm. Dry off before you catch a chill." Alexander stared at it for a long time. No one had done something like that for him in years. Not his ex-wife, not his staff, no one. He picked up the mug slowly, brought it to his lips, and for the first time in years, the warmth didn't just touch his throat, it reached his heart. The envelope arrived on a Thursday morning, slipped under Claire's front door like a silent whisper. It was cream-colored, thick, and bore no return address, only her name, written in a handwriting she instantly recognized. Bold, measured, Alexander Ashworth. She stared at it for a moment, hesitant. Her heart thudded in her chest. She had just finished feeding the twins breakfast and was preparing her mother's medication. It was a chaotic morning like any other. But this envelope stilled her. With careful fingers, she opened it. Inside there were no banknotes, no apology letter, no formality, just 3 pieces of paper. The first was a letter from St. Gregory's Academy, a prestigious private school in the city. It confirmed 2 full academic scholarships for Ava and Sophie Williams, tuition, uniforms, meals, and extracurriculars fully covered for the next 10 years. The second was a medical transfer agreement. Her mother, Elaine, would be moved from the underfunded public facility to a top-tier private cancer treatment center. The paperwork was complete, signed, and awaiting only Claire's final consent. The third was a note, no longer than one sentence. "This is not charity. This is a debt I owe to someone good." Claire read it again and again. Her fingers trembled as she set the documents down. Her knees gave way, and she sank slowly into the nearest chair. The tears came before she could stop them. Not because of the scholarships or the medical upgrade, but because someone, for the first time in a very long time, saw her struggle and responded, not with pity, not with strings, but with respect. He had watched her, judged her, yes, but he had also seen. Not once in all these years had anyone stepped in without her asking, without making her feel small. Now here it was, a silent gesture that said, "I see you." Her mother called softly from the next room. Claire wiped her face, stood, and moved to help, strong as always. But the tears never stopped. Only now they were not made of despair, they were made of release. Later that day, she called the number at the bottom of the transfer document. The woman on the line was kind, warm. "Yes, Miss Williams," she said. "Mr. Ashworth told us to be ready. Your mother can be moved as early as tomorrow." Claire hung up and sat in silence. For a long time, she just held the envelope in her lap. She thought of the library, the way he had looked at her, not like a servant, but like a person. The way his voice had trembled when he spoke of betrayal and loneliness, the tea left on the counter, the trust, tentative but real, beginning to grow. That night, Claire stood by her daughters' beds as they slept, brushing a stray hair from Ava's forehead. The scholarship paper was still on the kitchen table, the seal of St. Gregory's catching the light from the window. She had imagined this moment so many times. Help arriving, a miracle, but never like this. Not quiet, not wordless, not wrapped in such grace, and still a voice inside her whispered doubt. Why? Why would a man like Alexander Ashworth go to such lengths? But then she remembered his eyes when he spoke of his past, the walls he had built, the silence he had lived in, and how, little by little, he had let her in. The next morning she walked into the Ashworth estate at exactly 7:02 a.m., as she always did. Her posture was straight, her uniform pressed, but her expression held something new, resolve. She did not speak of the envelope, neither did he. But as she passed him in the hallway on the way to the kitchen, she paused just briefly and said, "Thank you for seeing me." Alexander nodded, his voice low. It was long overdue, and in that moment something shifted. Not loud, not dramatic, but sure. They were no longer employer and employee. They were two people who had survived loss, who knew the weight of silence, and who, somehow, had begun to understand one another. Without fanfare, without pretense, just two souls meeting halfway. The office on the 5th floor of Ashworth Enterprises was unlike the others. No marble, no high-tech equipment, no rows of assistants in tailored suits. Instead, it was filled with drawings by children, stacks of files labeled with names and dates, and shelves of books on childhood trauma, education, and nonprofit work. This was the new department Alexander had been quietly forming for months, the Ashworth Foundation, a project close to his heart, but always shelved, incomplete. Until Claire. He invited her in one late afternoon, just as the rain began to patter softly against the windows. She stood in the doorway, hesitant, wiping her hands on the apron she still wore. "This is yours if you want it," Alexander said, motioning toward the desk. "I want to expand our outreach, support single mothers, help their children stay in school, provide housing, counseling. But I need someone who understands what that really means, someone who's lived it." Claire's eyes widened. "Me?" He nodded. "You're not just good. You're capable. You've seen both sides of the struggle. And somehow you still stand tall." She walked in slowly, fingers brushing the edge of the desk. "You trust me with all this?" Alexander looked at her, his gaze steady. "I already have." So they began working side by side. At first it was awkward, Formal emails, short meetings, quiet lunches. But as the weeks passed, the rhythm grew natural. They shared ideas over coffee, reviewed proposals late into the evening. And in those long hours, their conversations turned personal. Claire spoke of her daughters, how Ava loved painting and Sophie wanted to be a nurse. She mentioned their bedtime stories, their dreams, their questions about the world. Alexander listened. He shared pieces of his past, too, about how success had once felt like armor, protecting him from the emptiness left by betrayal. How he had learned that solitude did not equal safety. One afternoon, as they reviewed the logistics of a new mentorship program, Claire looked up from the spreadsheet and said softly, "Every morning I tell my girls the same thing. We do what's right. Not for rewards, not for applause, but because it is who we are." Alexander said nothing at first. Then he reached out and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. His touch was brief, respectful, but his eyes held something deeper. Admiration, respect, and something just beginning to bloom beyond either. Weeks later, he drove her and the girls to visit her mother at the new treatment center. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything. The twins giggled in the back seat, holding cupcakes they had made for Grandma Elaine. At the hospital, Claire went ahead to prepare the feeding tube, standing by the sink mixing formula with practiced care. Her mother, pale but lucid, sat up slowly when she saw Alexander. "You're the one who helped her?" she said, her voice raspy. Alexander stepped forward, surprised. "I just opened a door, she walked through it." Elaine reached for his hand. Her grip was weak but certain. She's always been strong, too strong. Sometimes strong people forget they're allowed to be happy too. Alexander swallowed hard. He looked toward the kitchen, where Claire stood with her back turned, shoulders shaking slightly. Elaine continued, voice trembling, "Before I go, I just want to know she won't carry it all alone anymore. She deserves to rest, to smile." Alexander bent down, clasped the older woman's hand with both of his, and whispered, "She will. She will be surrounded by people who love her, truly, and you will see it." Back in the kitchen, Claire wiped her cheeks, quickly composing herself before turning around. They stayed at the hospital for hours. Claire read to her mother while the girls napped beside her. Alexander sat in the corner, watching the scene. 3 generations of strength and love. As he looked at Claire, bathed in the soft glow of the lamp, a thought settled in his chest like truth. He was no longer helping her, he was standing beside her. It began with a headline, splashed across the front page of a glossy tabloid magazine. "The Blonde Maid's Rise, Inside the Billionaire's Fairy Tale Romance." A photo of Claire, hair pulled back, standing beside Alexander at a charity event, was printed in sharp, unforgiving color. Below it, the subhead screamed, "Has the cold-hearted CEO finally melted, or is this just another publicity stunt?" Claire stared at the article, stunned. Her hands trembled as she turned the page to find more, photos of her leaving Alexander's estate, one of them walking beside her daughters, and another, unmistakable, of Alexander's hand resting gently on her back. Then came the accusations. Anonymous sources quoted lines like, "She knew exactly what she was doing. She played the long game." The article suggested she was using her children and her past to gain sympathy, influence, and perhaps even a stake in the Ashworth fortune. That morning, Claire's phone buzzed nonstop. Texts, missed calls, gossip spreading faster than she could breathe. At the charity office, co-workers fell into hushed whispers as she entered. The air around her turned cold, thick with judgment. By afternoon, her mother had seen the article. Her voice, weak over the phone, trembled. "Claire? Is any of this true?" Her daughters came home from school confused. "Mommy, why are people saying you're famous?" The walls that Claire had worked so hard to rebuild began to collapse. She stopped answering Alexander's messages, declined his calls. She did not go to work. She withdrew, quiet, heartbroken, not because she was ashamed, but because she had trusted him. And now, The world thought her nothing more than a story, a symbol of scandal and manipulation. Alexander was furious, not at her silence, but at himself. He had been reckless, careless about how visible their partnership had become. He had not protected her from the very world he knew too well, and worse, he had made her feel like a pawn in a story he never meant to write. He drove to her apartment the next evening. Rain lashed against the windshield as if the sky mirrored his guilt. When she opened the door only part way, her face was pale and her eyes red. "Claire," he began, "you have to believe me. I didn't leak anything. I didn't invite this." She said nothing. "I never saw you as a strategy," he continued. "Everything I did, every offer, every word, it came from me, not my boardroom, not my image. You and your family were never part of a plan." Claire's voice was barely above a whisper. "But I was never supposed to be in your world, was I?" "You're not in my world," he said. "You are my world now." She looked away, blinking fast, as if each word physically hurt. "People look at me like I'm a joke. My daughters, my mom, they're being judged for something I didn't do." "I know," he said. "And I hate that I didn't stop it." The silence between them stretched. He reached forward, slow, tentative, like a man approaching a wounded bird. His hand brushed her cheek. For a moment she leaned into it, but just as suddenly she pulled back. "Alexander, I can't do this right now." He nodded, his throat tight. He stepped back as she gently, silently, closed the door. That night Alexander sat alone in the room where he had once left a safe open. Now it was locked. But his heart felt just as exposed as it had been that day, watching her from the shadows. Except this time he was not testing her, he was grieving. He wrote a letter. "Claire, you owe me nothing, but I owe you everything. My trust, my apology, my silence when you needed words, and my voice when you needed protection. I never intended to bring harm into your life. I only ever wanted to offer peace. I will not ask for forgiveness, but I will hope for your heart to heal. And if one day that heart ever opens again, I will be waiting, with no expectations, only love." He folded the letter and slipped it under her door, then walked away. Inside, Claire stood still, the paper clutched to her chest, unread but already heavy with meaning. For the first time since the storm began, she let herself cry, not from humiliation, but from the aching confusion of hope. The hospital corridor was cold, silent, except for the distant beeping of machines and the occasional shuffle of nurses' sneakers against linoleum. The overhead lights buzzed faintly, casting a sterile glow over everything they touched. Claire sat slumped on the hard plastic bench outside the pediatric wing, her hands clenched tightly in her lap, knuckles white, legs trembling beneath her. Her daughter, Ava, had collapsed at school that morning. High fever, labored breathing, confusion in her eyes that turned quickly into unconsciousness. The ambulance came too fast, and not fast enough. The doors had slammed shut, the sirens wailed, and Claire had barely managed to keep it together in the back as she held Ava's hand all the way to the emergency room. She had not called Alexander. She had stared at his name on her phone for 10 long minutes, thumb hovering over the screen, tears blurring the text. And then, with a breath that tasted of fear and shame, she locked the phone and shoved it deep into her coat pocket. This was her child, her crisis, her responsibility. He had already done too much. He had already been caught in enough of her chaos. Inside room 24, Ava lay quiet, her small body tangled in IV lines and heart monitors. Every few minutes, she whimpered in her sleep. The doctors had said they were waiting on labs, that it could be viral or bacterial or worse. Claire had nodded, but her mind was a whirlwind of numbers, medical bills, unanswered prayers. She had told the attending physician she would find a way to pay for the specialized antibiotic therapy Ava might need, but the truth was, she had no way, not this time. Then, the door at the far end of the hall opened. Footsteps echoed, measured, firm, familiar. Claire looked up and her breath caught mid-thought. Alexander. He stood tall in the doorway, his expression unreadable but his presence undeniable. He did not speak immediately. He just walked toward her, each step filled with a quiet urgency that stripped her of every wall she had tried to build. Behind him walked a man in a white coat, sharp, precise, carrying a leather case. Claire recognized him from a photo in Alexander's study. Dr. Henry Madsen, his private physician, the one who had cared for Alexander's sister during her own long battle with leukemia. Claire stood, her voice caught in her throat. "How—" "I heard," Alexander said gently, his eyes fixed on hers. "Your neighbor called the estate. She said you left in a panic and didn't come back." Claire tried to speak, but all that came out was a choked breath. Her pride surged for one last stand, but her heart, weary and frightened, overruled it. Alexander turned to Dr. Madsen. "Room 204. Do what you need to do." The doctor nodded and entered the room without another word. Claire's composure crumbled. The tears came fast and without mercy. She did not try to hide them this time. Her knees buckled slightly, but before she could fall, Alexander was there. He wrapped his arms around her, firm, steady, unshakable, and held her close. She buried her face in his coat, the sobs shaking her entire frame. "I did not know what to do," she whispered, her voice muffled by emotion. "I was not afraid of the sickness. I was afraid of needing someone." Alexander lowered his chin to her hair, resting there, breathing in the moment. "You taught me what honesty looks like when no one's watching. Let me show you what staying looks like, when it matters most." Claire pulled back slightly, enough to look up at him through tear-streaked lashes. "I don't want to be your project. I don't want to be rescued." "You are not," he said. "You are someone I choose to stand beside, every step." A few minutes later, Dr. Madsen returned. "The infection is under control. We've started treatment. She'll be okay." Claire released a breath that had been trapped for hours. She rushed into the room, kissed Ava's warm forehead, and whispered promises of pancakes and cartoons when they got home. Alexander remained at the doorway, watching them, watching the pure, unshakable strength of love. And in that moment, he knew with absolute certainty, he was not here because he felt responsible. He was here because he no longer knew how to be anywhere else. A year had passed, but the study remained unchanged. The chandelier still cast warm halos across the marble floor. The antique clock still ticked in its deliberate rhythm. And the safe, sleek, heavy, and silent, stood exactly where it had that morning long ago. But this time, it was closed. Claire entered the room slowly, her hand in Alexander's. She wore a navy dress with her blonde hair loose over her shoulders. Her eyes scanned the familiar space, then landed on the safe. Her brows lifted slightly. Alexander gave a small smile. "Do you remember what happened here?" She gave a gentle nod. "I do." He walked her toward the desk, where a single drawer sat slightly open. The same drawer where he had once stored his most guarded documents. The drawer he never let anyone touch. He took a breath and said, "That day, I opened this safe to test you. I thought I was being clever. I thought trust was something people had to earn, or fail to." He stepped closer to the safe, then reached up and gently touched the steel surface. "But you did not just pass the test. You taught me what it meant to believe again." Claire listened in silence, her throat tightening. "I have kept this safe closed since," he continued, "because I finally understood that some things, like love and trust, should never be tested. They should be given." He turned to the drawer and pulled out a small velvet box. No flourish, no theatrics, just truth. Opening it revealed a simple ring. No oversized diamonds, no designer hallmark, just a clean, elegant band with a delicate twist of silver and one small sapphire. Alexander dropped to one knee, not out of performance, but reverence. He looked up into her eyes and said softly, "Claire Williams, you are the only person who ever made me believe I could have something real, not because of what you gave me, but because of what you never took. You gave me back my peace." He glanced at the safe once more. "So now, I want to close this forever, and instead open something far more precious." He held up the ring. "Will you open your heart, as you once opened your trust for me? Will you marry me?" Claire's lips parted, her breath caught in her chest. Tears blurred her vision. She nodded slowly, then firmly. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Alexander." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, two little voices shrieked with joy from behind the doorway. "Mommy!" he asked. He asked! Claire turned just in time to catch both of her daughters barreling into the room, flinging their arms around her and Alexander. He laughed, holding them close, one on each side. Claire wiped her eyes, smiling through the tears, her heart impossibly full. The safe behind them stayed closed, but the room, once heavy with suspicion and solitude, now echoed with laughter, love, and a new beginning. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that trust can be rebuilt and love can bloom even from the most unlikely places, then we invite you to stay with us on this journey. At Soul-Stirring Stories, we bring you true and fictional tales crafted to move, inspire, and heal. Do not forget to like, share, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories that remind us of the quiet strength inside every human soul. And if you believe that integrity still matters in this world, leave a comment below with a heart and let us know. What would you do if no one was watching? We'll see you in the next story. Until then, keep your heart open.